Welcome to the latest episode of Lean In Leander. Glad you're joining me once again here on the podcast, and I wanted to take a moment to take a look around what's going on in Leander right now, as far as where the city is currently trending and where we might see the city going in the near term. A couple of things that most people may be very aware of. There's a lot of new development in the city, a lot of new businesses opening up. You can drive down Hero Way, you can drive over on Reagan. There's several different areas that are under construction or in the process of filling out some of the space that they've developed there. A lot of really exciting things going on from that perspective, and a really good diversification of the economy here in Leander. Most recently, there's also been an announcement with the North Line project that bodes very, very well for some office space and other things to be built in that particular dense urban area that will bode well for the city of Leander in the long term. So with all of that and looking around and seeing what was going on, one of the things that I thought hadn't really gotten a whole lot of attention was the recent resignation of the city manager. He's decided to move on to Nacogdoches, and we obviously wish him well in those endeavors. But I thought it would give us an opportunity here on the podcast to take a look at that process, see exactly how that works. I was curious myself, did a little bit of research on the subject, and was able to come up with a, I think, pretty good presentation of what we should expect in the next few weeks and months as we replace the city manager. So this is a recap of what has already happened, and also hopefully some information on how the process works going forward that maybe brings this to your attention in a way that it hasn't been brought to your attention before, and perhaps as citizens prompt some additional questions on this process and things we may want to talk to our council members and mayor about as it relates to the hiring of the next city manager. Again, remember, the citizens of Leander at the top of the org chart, so we do have an opportunity to give our opinions and maybe submit some additional thoughts and ideas on this process. So to start, I wanted to give a brief overview of what happened in the City Council meeting that took place on September 18th.
Quorum is item number 3. We're now going to convene into executive session at 5:31 p.m. pursuant to section 551.074 Texas Government Code to discuss or deliberate the appointment, employment, and duties of a public officer or employee, interim city manager, interviews, and city manager search. The time is 5:31. All right, we are going to reconvene into open session at 7:04 p.m. to take action as deemed appropriate in the City Council's discretion regarding interim city manager interviews and city manager search. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have a motion?
Motion to appoint Isaac Turner as interim city manager, authorize the city attorney to negotiate and prepare a contract as discussed in executive session, and bring back for final approval.
Second. Motion and second. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have another motion?
No action.
All right. And I just want to say to all the applicants that we spoke to, they were all outstanding and fantastic, and we would be honored with any of them. So thank you all very much for your time this evening. Moving on to item 4, discuss and consider action on proposal and contract with recruiting firm in the search of a city manager. I move that we approve the contract with SGR.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. And with that, council is adjourned at 7:06 p.m. Good night.
So when I first went to the city website, I was thinking there would be a little bit more of the conversation around this process of the hiring of a new city manager. Obviously, this is not meant to frame this in any negative way whatsoever. There just wasn't a whole lot of information there. Most of that conversation obviously took place under executive session. So I wanted to explain that a little bit so you understood exactly why that is and what might be happening there. And also kind of give a little bit of flavor as to, again, this process of getting to the point that we hire a new city manager. It's a pretty important position in my opinion, and hopefully you'll see why I think that based on a few key points that I'll bring up here shortly. So in reviewing the process of hiring a new city manager, I came across a few items that I thought would be of interest to the audience, listeners and viewers. A little bit about the process itself and a little bit about the personalities that are playing into this. So one of the first things I wanted to know was, what exactly does a city manager in the state of Texas necessarily do? And as it is defined, a city manager in Texas who is working in a city under home rule charter, similar to what we are here in Leander, basically have a greater autonomy to shape their roles and responsibilities compared to those cities operating under general law. And so there is a lot that could be read into that. But it also opens up the conversation as to, who that particular person is necessarily responsible to. At the end of the day, they're responsible to the citizens of the city of Leander, and by extension, those citizens are represented by the council members. So again, here, it's just something of this importance. Someone who has this much responsibility should definitely have some additional vetting, at least indirectly, from the citizens of the city itself. So I encourage you to educate yourself as to this process and to what it is that we're looking to accomplish here. So we most recently were, since November of 2019, Rick Beverlin was the city manager here in Leander. Now, Beverlin has a lot of experience, over 20 years working in urban transportation planning. He worked with the economic development in Greater Austin and Houston, so definitely someone who had the qualifications. He served as the assistant city manager for public transportation in Galveston, and then he was the economic development director in League City, after which he was a city administrator for Kemah, which is near Galveston, kind of down in the coastal area off of Houston, was the VP of Governmental Affairs for the Goodman Corporation and a senior transportation planner, again, for Houston-Galveston area. Again, we wish Mr. Beverlin well in his future endeavors. He definitely served the city from November 2019 until essentially here in September of 2023. What the city has chosen to do in the interim is appoint a gentleman by the name of Isaac Turner. Mr. Turner will actually take the role. I believe it was essentially offered to him. There was a motion on September 18th to make him the interim city manager. But that will not take effect until October 16th once contracts and things of that nature are completed. This could change, obviously, but that is where we are right now. Now, Mr. Turner also has a very good resume, over 3 decades in municipal government experience in both Texas and Florida. He's currently president of ID Turner Solutions. It's a consulting firm that helps with government services. When I looked into ID Turner Solutions, it looks as though it was constituted in 2022. It may be a little bit older than that. I don't know. That was the only information I could find on that particular entity. In addition to that, Mr. Turner has most recently served as the interim city manager in Hutto, which bodes well, perhaps, for us here in Leander, as there was a lot of economic activity in the city of Hutto most recently. Obviously, they've been able to get some additional boosts from larger corporations coming in. I don't know that's necessarily something that we can do here in Leander, but I'm certain that that experience that Mr. Turner had there could find some applicable points here in Leander as we move forward. He was also the interim city manager in Bridgeport, Texas in 2021, and before that the city manager of Taylor, Texas from 2014 to 2019. So again, here, gentleman has a very good resume as far as his experience. He's degreed from the University of Kansas and Kansas State University. What I found that a lot of the city managers generally have a degree in public administration and then go on and get some additional education in either political science or management, things of that nature. So very well tracking with what we see typically in an interim city manager, and obviously has some experience in that role. Now, the other thing that the City Council did on the 18th was they approved a contract with a recruiting firm called Strategic Government Resource. They are obviously being contracted to assist with the formal search for the new city manager, and again, assuming that all contracts are signed, they'll begin their work in October. Now, seeing as though we have a new interim city manager, I thought it would be important to kind of understand exactly what this process will look like going forward. So going back to what we saw with the City Council meeting on the 18th, they cite section 551.074, which is basically the Texas equivalent of a closed meeting rule. So it allows the City Council to do the business of the city as it relates to appointment, employment, evaluations, things of that nature. Those can sometimes be disciplinary, and there is a mechanism within that to allow anyone, an employee who's the subject of such deliberation, to request a public hearing. So in this particular instance, there was no one involved with that who would necessarily request a public hearing. Nonetheless, the meeting was somewhat short and sweet, to the point of these decisions already being made. So all we can really look at is what the City Council has already done. And in that case, when we take another look at Strategic Government Resources, SGR was incorporated in Texas back in 2002, and it is a fully owned entity of a gentleman by the name of Ron Holyfell. Now, Mr. Holyfell was a city manager in Garland, Texas, and he was an assistant city manager in Plano prior to that. He has his degree in public administration from Texas Tech and a bachelor's degree in political science from Abilene Christian University. So one of the things that I found interesting about Strategic Government Resources is they lean heavily into servant leadership. They actually have a foundation, I believe, or an association that is heavily invested in that type of approach. Now, servant leadership is obviously a leader who serves, essentially. Basically, not someone who's necessarily bringing a whole lot of attention to themselves, but is able to achieve and finds their calling, if you will, in achieving in such a role that you're basically kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. I thought it was pretty interesting from that perspective. A couple of different reasons why. Obviously, in the city of Leander, it's pretty obvious that the city manager's role is something that's a little bit muted, at least from my experience over the last 5 years. It's very difficult to kind of see, what that particular role was doing within the context of the city itself. But again, I find it interesting in this particular instance. Obviously, Mr. Holyfell has a great deal of experience in this particular area. His company does as well. And so I pulled together a little bit of what was in the proposal to the city to help you and us understand a little bit of how, again, this process works. Now, I've included here, you can see, if you're looking at the video, there's a link there. I've shortened the link because it's a really long link, but it is the full proposal from SGR. And if you're interested in kind of looking into some of the granular detail, you definitely can Google that. The city has it posted. I'll just shorten that link here to make it a little bit easier for you to go and find that information. But the methodology that they're employing is obviously fairly standard for any kind of recruitment process. What I found very interesting about this as well is that the initial screening and review and facilitation of the candidates, if you will, seems to be pretty much at the resource and process that SGR brings to fore. So there will be a group of candidates, from what I can tell, who will have gone through at least a initial interviewing process. Questionnaires and things of that nature will also be in place before those candidates are brought to the committee. And in this case, I'm assuming that the committee would be the city council, and the city council would have an opportunity to be briefed on those particular semifinalists, and then moving into the finalist candidates. Most of this is, again, pretty standard stuff, background investigations. But again, here I found something very interesting for me in SGR, in that there's a first-year game plan or advanced exercise that's part of their process, which is interesting because from a planning perspective, would you take SGR, are they planning out how the new city official would view their first year or what they're planning to work on? It's an open question as far as I'm concerned. And again, like I said, the rest of this is really kind of pretty standard from a recruiting perspective. The timeline on this is approximately 15 weeks. So that's based on their scale. So if you were to start, let's just say, right around October 16th, you're going well into December. Maybe this decision is not made until the 1st of next year. So just dependencies there based on how the interviews go and how quickly people are interviewing for the particular position. Because it's something that I think is important, that whole process is going to cost the city about $25,000. So interesting that this does not include any type of advertisement. And when you go to SGR, you actually see in the proposal a pretty comprehensive advert and job posting, if you will, example that's provided from the city of Hutto, which again, I found this very, very interesting. It's pretty lengthy, which is why I'm not including it here. But definitely something that if you take the time to look at the actual proposal, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a very well done, very marketing oriented type of view of the city. I'd be very, very interested to see what they come up with for Leander, assuming that we're paying those ad placement costs as well. I'm assuming that that's how that works. I may be incorrect in that assumption. That may be part of their initial package. Nonetheless, it would be really, really interesting to see how they frame the city of Leander in relation to the position of city manager. And the last little thing I kind of wanted to point out is in their proposal, they actually give some examples of where they are in their current recruitment process, and as well as some success stories of who they have placed before. Here again, just something that caught my eye. It was really rather interesting to see that with the recruitment they're doing, specifically in city managers, most of the cities that they're working for are a little bit smaller than Leander now. Leander, with that population of around 80,000 already, will be pushing 100,000 in the next couple of years, would be one of the larger cities that they've worked with. There were some examples, Largo, Florida, and Lawton, Oklahoma. If you're interested in looking at that, go look at Lawton. It's similar, somewhat in scope, to Leander. So maybe that bodes well as far as their ability to find people who can help with those kind of developing and growing cities, if you will. I also took a look at some of the cities that they actually had placements in 2023. And here again, there's a couple of cities that are a little bit larger that I just kind of highlighted here. Laredo and Navajo County being a little bit bigger than what we are here right now in Leander, and then Rolette, Texas, which is a little bit smaller. Those were just a little bit more topical from that perspective in the case that they were down here in the southern tier, southwest, if you will. So I thought it was kind of interesting for those particular cities, and the fact that this SGR company actually assisted them with their efforts. Now, I know a lot of this might seem a little wonky to a lot of you, and hopefully if you've stayed with me up to here, I want to kind of explain why. I think it's really important for us as citizens to be aware of what is going on in our city, okay? There is a lot of decision making that is done on a daily basis, I would imagine, that affects us individually as citizens. We see a lot of the very visual and very obvious things that fall under the umbrella of city leadership, with proclamations and events and festivals and things of that nature. And those are all great. That's fantastic stuff, and I applaud the city for all of their efforts in there, not only in continuing to support a number of the festivals that take place and the events that take place here in the city, but also showing a stronger sense of diversification and actual, what's the best way to put this? Recognition of how much of a mix of cultures and peoples and ideas that we have here in the city of Leander. I think it's one of our strengths, and I definitely, again, applaud the city for those efforts. I think it's always nice to see when that is happening, and you can tell, in my opinion, humbly submitted here, that it does tend to kind of inspire some people, and I do see more people getting involved in not only recognizing what the city is doing, but calling attention to some of the efforts that are being made. Again, that said, that's the reason that I highlighted this in this specific episode, because I wanted you to know that, hey, we're in the process of hiring a new city manager, and hey, here's the process, how it works, and what you can expect. I encourage you, as I will, to ask questions about this process and understand how these decisions will be made. This is something that will affect us very, very specifically in the next, let's just say, 3 to 5 years. Doesn't look like city managers hang out a whole lot of time, pretty much across the state. It's pretty normal. But with that being said, that's a very key time frame in the development of the city of Leander. As you know, we've spent a lot of time working on water issues and structural issues and infrastructure issues over the last few years. And within the next 5, maybe 8 to 10 years, all of those efforts will come to fore with the remaining land that is available in the city of Leander to be developed for either commercial development, Class A structures, things of that nature that will diversify the tax base for our city. I think it's very, very important that that happens for the long term of the development of not only the city of Leander, but for the long term being able to support all of the services that we'll need as we grow larger and larger as a city. Eventually, what's going to happen out here is that Austin's going to resemble very, very much, I think, the city of San Antonio, which as you drive to San Antonio, if you've ever gone down 35, you feel like you're in San Antonio about 50, 60, 80 miles outside of San Antonio proper. And that's because of the way that the center of the country, the center of Texas rather, is developing. There's a lot of influx here. There's a lot of new opportunities. There's a lot of new major corporations relocating here to Central Texas, and it affects a lot of this growth in a number of ways that we can't even anticipate today. So with that said, the city manager will be a very integral part of how we proceed going forward from this, in this process from today going into the future. It's a super, super important role, and one that we should be aware of as citizens. So I invite you to take some time to do your own research. I've tried to tee it up here a little bit, kind of shorten some of the process for some of you. But if you have any questions, as usual, feel free to reach out to me here at Lean and Leander. I'll be happy to answer what I can based on the research that I've done already. And if you want to look into it a little bit further, we'll continue to monitor this particular process over the next few months, just to kind of see how things are going. I did check to see if the City of Leander's city manager position had been posted yet. Could not find anything to date, but again, that might not be until mid-October when we see that. But I definitely will do some follow-up there and give you the information as to how that's being presented and what type of candidates we might be drawing from that perspective. So until then, I definitely, again, encourage you to stay involved here in Leander. Appreciate all of the niceties when I run into folks out in the city. Appreciate you all recognizing some of these efforts, and I certainly look forward to continuing our conversations going forward. Thanks again. We'll talk again soon here at Lean and Leander.